Welcome to Lime Rock. As you probably know, our 2022 Lime Rock event is coming right up on August 1st and 2nd. This is the trackside classroom topic on smoothness designed for student drivers, although obviously any driver is welcome to watch, and hopefully we'll pick up some tips. We will do a classroom session at the track as well for each run group, but that will be more of a discussion as we don't really have time at the track to go into the depth that we can in these recorded classrooms. So with all that set, we're going to dive right in. My name's Bill Gilbert. I'm one of the NNJR chief instructors. And in fact, I will be one of the chiefs running the Lime Rock event along with Craig Mahan. So as I said, today's topic is smoothness, and there's a nice quote from Vic Elford here that kind of makes that point. But we'll dive right into that. I'll start with our standard disclaimer, which is that driving on the track has risks, and those risks you take knowingly when you come to the track. We offer a lot of advice, but at the end of the day, it's your responsibility to apply that. So today's topic, we're going to talk about what smoothness is, why we care about it, some of the prerequisites, and most importantly, for those of you that have been on the track a little bit, perhaps how to improve. So let's start with what smoothness is. The objective is to keep the car balanced. A way to think about that is no more weight transfer than is needed. And you do that with just the right amount of input, a minimalist input, as the quote suggests here. Now, for that to happen, we have to be precise and deliberate in how we use all of the controls, the steering, the gas, the shifting. And of course, we never want to upset the car. And I love this quote from Alain Prost, who said, "When I look fast, I'm not smooth and I'm going slowly. And when I look slow, I am smooth and going fast." And if you've ever observed good drivers at an autocross, or drivers in general at an autocross, you will typically see that the fastest drivers look slower or less dramatic than the slower cars, and same reason. Now, why do we care? Well, as Ross Bentley puts it, smooth is fast. And he goes on to explain that in more depth than I'm going to take here today. But the short version is that if you keep the car balanced, it has more traction. There's more weight on the four tires than there is if the car is jerked around. And as a result, we have more grip. And so this applies whether you're a beginning driver or a very advanced driver. If you can keep the car better balanced, even if you're a pro, you're going to have more grip and you're going to go faster. Now, since we're talking to student drivers in this video, we're going to start with some of the basics, some of the prerequisites. And if you're new to driver's ed, these will be a good reminder. Many of these, probably most of them, your instructor will cover with you, but if you've only done a few events, they're a good checklist to keep in mind. Now, it's obviously critical that you're comfortable in the car. And that really comes down to seating position and mirrors, which we're going to talk about. And then we need to have basic track knowledge. It doesn't do us any good to talk about smoothness if you don't know your way around the track. And so there's some basics with reference points and rhythm that we'll also touch on here. I'm going to do these quickly because your instructor will cover these, but I want you to be aware that these are all very important and use these as a checklist as you're getting ready for Lime Rock. Proper seating positions illustrated here so that you can easily reach the controls with your feet, the gas, the brakes, the clutch. You have bend left in the knee as shown, and also bend left in the elbows to reach the wheel. And we strongly recommend the hand placement you see here at 9 and 3. But those are the basics. How comfortable are you in the car? Well, here's a way to check it out. Does the seat fit perfectly? Can I see well with my helmet? And if I have a Hans on, do I need to adjust the mirrors? We'll talk about that. Does the car steering feel right? Do the brakes feel right? Does it sound right? If those things don't sound or feel right, then you're not going to be comfortable and you're not going to be as smooth or safe in the car as you would like to be. Here's a way to be sure, especially if you're new and you're not used to wearing the helmet. Just sit in your car for 10 minutes or so with the helmet on and take a look around. Is there anything getting in the way of you seeing? Maybe the seat needs to go up or down a little bit, those kinds of things. Now let's turn to the basics of track driving, starting with reference points. If you're new, these terms may be terms that you're unfamiliar with, in which case, and now is a good time to get used to them. If you've driven a few events, you can give this talk as well as I can. Here's the basic reference points on any given corner: the braking point, the beginning of braking; the turn-in point, where we begin the turn by starting the turn of the steering wheel, typically marked with a cone. And the apex, the inside of the corner, where we come closest to the inside, typically a curb there, and always a cone there to mark the apex. And then track out, or the exit of the corner, and also typically marked with a cone. Now that curve is what's called the line, which is the path we want to follow around the track. And if this is old hat to you, great. If it's not, these are terms and concepts that you'll work on with your instructor. Now, as you do that, you'll discover there's this ABC rhythm as we go around the track. We accelerate on the straights, we brake while going straight, and then we corner or turn as we come off the brake pedal. And then we repeat that process. That's why we refer to this as a rhythm. The amount of brakes that we use varies from corner to corner. And I'll talk about that when I talk about Lime Rock turn by turn. But this rhythm applies. The nice thing about driving Lime Rock is you get lots of repetitions because it's a short track, and you get to repeat the corners and get to learn them. Now, last thing in the prerequisites here are mirrors. Starting once you've seated yourself properly in the car, the rearview mirror should be adjusted so you can see the entire rear window and as far behind the car as possible. Probably have that already done, but the outside mirrors are probably not adjusted properly. So the left mirror we adjust by leaning our head against the driver's window and pushing the mirror out until we can just see the back corner of the car, sort of as you see in the diagram here. And we just want to see that back corner slightly. The right mirror, same thing, only we're leaning our head underneath the rear view mirror, pushing the right mirror out. And when you sit back in the correct seating position, you won't see anything in the mirrors. The advantage of this adjustment is shown here. Most people have their side mirrors adjusted so that they have a big blind spot where a whole car can hide. And that's important on the street, obviously, but it's really important on the track. If you adjust the mirrors, as I just described, you will discover that the blind spot is either smaller or perhaps even non-existent. And certainly you will have much better information coming to you from those side mirrors. Okay, so those are the prerequisites. Let's dive into how do we improve our smoothness on track. Well, here's some classic advice that I'll go through very quickly because I'm going to come back to some of this. Controls are not an on-off switch. No jerky or sudden movements. You'll hear terms like wind and unwind the steering. Turn the steering wheel progressively and once so that the car takes a set. And that there's a reason for that. We want the car to settle on the springs once, not to be bouncing on and off the springs. You may hear people refer to putting an egg between your foot and the gas pedal, by meaning squeeze the gas roll on the gas as opposed to jumping on it. Gear shifts. Gear shifts should be done in 3 motions. And this may take a little bit of practice, but if you practice it, you'll discover it really works. The 3 motions are out of gear, across the gate, and into gear. So say we're shifting from 3rd to 4th. In most cars, that's pretty simple. Third, out of 3rd, straight back, across the gate, and then straight back further into 4th gear. 3 motions. If we're going across the gate, like 4th to 5th, same idea. Forward out of 4th, across the gate, and forward into 5th. And practice that with your fingertips, and you'll be surprised how much easier it makes gear shifts after you practice it. Braking, we want to have our heel on the floor so that we can move our foot as a pivot from the gas pedal to the brake. And when we get on the brake, we want smooth but very hard initial pressure. So smooth doesn't necessarily mean gentle in this case. We want to really push on that brake pedal when we're coming to big bend or other heavy braking zones, but we don't want to jump on the brake pedal. I've sometimes told people that you push until you feel resistance, then push hard. So in other words, don't jump on the pedal. Give the pedal just an instant as you press on it to build up pressure, and then press hard. And of course, when we come off the brakes, it's the reverse. We're not doing that with lots of pressure. We want to come off gently. All of these things are things we can practice in day-to-day street driving. But here's some specific 4 things to be aware of that reinforce some of those thoughts. The first one is vision. And this is critical to driving on track. If you're new, your instructor is really going to work with you to getting your eyes up and further ahead, because we really want to look as far ahead as possible. And we also need to develop the skill to look through and around each corner so that we develop that mental picture of what each corner looks like. And of course, we always want to be looking at exactly where we want the car to go, because believe it or not, the car goes where we look. Now, in terms of how far ahead, 20 seconds seems pretty radical, right? Well, yes, but the whole point is we want the eyes scanning as far ahead as possible. We have the benefit of flaggers who can help us look around corners and over hills, but we still want the eyes looking up ahead. Awareness. I talked before about not using the controls like an on-off switch, but if we want to get better at it, we have to pay attention to how we use those controls. So we'll say more about that in just a second. Here's another way to think about it. This applies when you're turning into a corner and needing to come off the gas pedal. Once we turn the wheels into a corner, the tires have to use a lot of their traction for cornering grip, where we can't be using the gas pedal at that point. So we have to come off the gas. Now, for awareness, to get yourself more familiar with how you're using the controls, think about pressure, or the amount of pressure that you put on the gas pedal. Maybe you think of that as a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. And same thing with the brake pedal, same thing with the steering. And sensitize your feet and hands to calibrate so that you know what a 5 out of 10 feels like when you're turning the steering wheel or pressing on the brake. And same with all of the controls. Now, this requires being relaxed, because if you're tensed up, your tense muscles, you're not going to get that kind of feedback. But we're trying to really calibrate or concentrate here on how much effort are we putting into the steering wheel? How much effort are we putting into the gas pedal? how much effort are we putting on that brake pedal? And here's the awareness questions you can ask yourself. How smooth are you now? Pick steering, for example. Rate yourself from 1 to 10 and write that down in your track notebook. And then, focus on it when you go out the next time. And you can pick steering, you can pick brake application, gas, upshifts, downshifts. Pick whichever one you feel you need to work on, and this will help you get better. And of course, you can practice. Again, we want to pick one aspect and focus on refining it. And this is an area where you can use your street driving, because we do a whole lot. Most of us spend a lot more time driving on the street than we do on the track. These techniques of getting smoother will make you a better track driver and a better street driver. And Ross Bentley has a nice book that's all about street driving, actually, and a lot of tips there that are helpful on the day-to-day driving on the road and on the track. Now, here's a common area that new drivers screw up, where this is a common mistake. People feel like, I'm on the track, I'm in a hurry, I need to do that upshift really fast. I need to slam the gear shift from third to fourth, or I need to jerk the steering wheel into the corner. Well, those are never a good idea. We never, ever want to be in a hurry on the track unless it's an emergency. Everything else should be done in a deliberate, unrushed, unforced way. And if you've ever noticed the in-car cameras when you have pro drivers, they look relaxed, right? Their hands and feet move quickly, but they're not rushing. And there's a difference, because if we rush, we're almost surely going to make a mistake. And so the way to think about the controls is that accuracy and precision are more important than speed. Now, smooth use of the controls turns out to be consistent with rapid use of the controls after lots of practice. And I have to emphasize that. That's why when you watch the pros, yes, their gear shifts are fast, but they're not slamming the gear shift. They're moving it deliberately, quickly, yes, but probably with 2 or 3 fingers. And this is a case where less is more. Now, I have an example here. It's not a perfect example, but just watch the downshift here and how I use my hands on the downshift, and then watch the steering through the bus stop. This is not Lime Rock, this is Watkins Glen, but you'll get the idea of what I mean by being deliberate with the controls. You'll also see it's not slow, but I will point out that I have had many years of practicing both steering and shifting in this manner. And it's I learned it exactly the manner I described before. 3 motions: out of gear, across the gate, into gear. So let's watch. So here we are approaching, this is a 5th to 4th downshift. So out of gear, across. Now notice just smooth use of the steering wheel, and not slow necessarily, but smooth, 1 motion. So not rocket science, but smooth use of the controls is what we're trying to achieve here. So here's a few other ideas that you can think about, especially if you're focusing on, if you have trouble with smoothness on any of these areas. Make sure your grip on the steering wheel isn't a death grip. Maybe it's a 4 on a 1 to 10 scale, 3 or a 4, most a 5. Look further ahead. You can never look far enough ahead. Think about coming off the brakes slower. Again, we're never in a hurry. In some corners, we want to be very deliberate and almost slow in how we come off the brake pedal. A technique, if you've had some experience, that can help you is to focus on the point where you do come off the brakes, called end of braking. I've mentioned physical fitness here because if you're tired on the track, for whatever reason, Of course, you wouldn't have partied the night before or anything, but if you're tired, you're not going to be as smooth and as focused as you otherwise would be. If you're not comfortable, as I said before, that can affect your smoothness. Maybe you need to change the seating position slightly and see if that helps. But whatever you try, write it down in that track notebook and write what did work and just as importantly, what did not work. So as a summary, smooth is fast. That's why we care about it. Don't skip those prerequisites of seating position, mirrors, and so on, the basic line around the track. All the classic advice about the egg under the gas pedal and so on, that all works, including that use of the gear shift. Think about how you use the controls in terms of pressure, on a 1 to 10 scale, and especially apply that to brake release if you have some experience. Never be in a hurry, never rush, and relax and be sensitive to the feedback that the car is telling you. The car is always giving us input. We just have to be receptive to it. And if we're relaxed in the car and not forcing things, then we're going to be more receptive to that input. So with all that said, we can discuss any questions you have at the track, and be glad to dive into any particular questions you have or any specifics that where perhaps I wasn't as clear as you would like. At this point, I'm going to shift gears and we're going to talk about the track at Lime Rock itself. In other words, turn by turn around Lime Rock. The normal disclaimer applies here. I'm going to show you a way around Lime Rock, but you have to figure it out with your instructor's help. To begin with, here are the passing zones at Lime Rock. All but one are on the right side only, and that's for safety reasons. So on the front straight, which is the longest passing zone, right side only. After Big Bend, so let me this is the front straight here. This is Big Bend. We'll talk more about that in a minute, but there's a passing zone between turns 2 and 3 after Big Bend. You can pass on either side there. It's a very short zone, but you can put a car by there easily. The back straight, known as No Name Straight, is a passing zone, as is this chute after the uphill before West Bend, and again on the right side. So those are the passing zones. Your instructor will work with you on those, but I always like to remind ourselves of where we can pass. So let's take a tour around the track. This is Big Bend, looking down on it. And the thing I want you to notice is that the second half of Big Bend is tighter than the first half, meaning it's slower. What that means is we can enter this corner faster than we can exit it. And so this is a corner where we carry the brakes in a long ways because we are basically extending the front straight into the first part of Big Bend, and then getting the car slowed down and ready to navigate turn 2. So here's some photos from on track. Let's talk about braking for Big Bend, the heaviest braking zone on the track. Typically you're going to start to brake at 5 or 4. And I typically recommend, I find this is easiest for most drivers, is to, before we begin to brake, so at either 5 or 4 or anywhere in between, whatever you prefer, or your instructor, just turn the car slightly toward that apex, which is underneath the right-hand part of the bridge here. I'm sorry, let me go back here a second. All right. Okay, in any case, I was trying to get a better view of it, but it's not helping me here. So we're going to brake in a straight line, and this is a heavy brake zone, but we're in a straight line. It's just we're diagonaling across the track surface. It may seem odd the first time, but it's very easy, very comfortable. We're aiming for the concrete curb that is easier to see in person than you can see in this particular camera. And you know, you might even want to run along that curb a short distance, but there's kind of an area where it sticks out just about where the back of that last car, that black car, is in this photo. And that's where the apex is. And we're still on braking and downshifting. We'd be finishing the downshift at this point if you're downshifting. But we would probably still be on some brake at this point, because as I said before, we can carry brakes into the early part of the corner. We would want to be coming off the brakes about the time we get to the apex or just after it. Once we're into Big Bend, now we need to get those eyes way around to the right. In fact, we can't even see how far around to the right we want to be in this photo. We want to be a long ways around, because in the overhead, you may not have seen this, but this is a big corner, takes up a lot of real estate, and we're here for a bit of time. So we want to get the eyes up. And the other thing to note, and you can see it easier here, is we're only using the right-hand half of the track here. And the reason is that the right-hand half, or the inside half, is banked more than the outside half. And so it's not helpful to go past the middle of the track here. So if it were all banked uniformly, we would use the whole track, but it's not. To help with the eyes, even in the previous picture, we want the eyes around. There's a flag station around there. We want to get the eyes all the way around to that flag station, and because that's where we're eventually going to be. Even as we go further into Big Bend in this picture, you know, now we can at least start to see the apex of turn 2, the second half of Big Bend, but it's still a long ways away. And this corner requires patience, because we do not want to be early for this corner, you know, because if we're early to the apex here, or on too much gas too soon, we will surely run out of road, as many people have. If that ever does happen to you, please drive off into the grass here or whatever corner, because in this example, there's lots of room out to track left if we do get into turn 2 too fast or too early. But if we try to save the car, try to keep it on the track and lose it, we're going to spin and hit a tire wall that's on the inside of turn 2. So a corner that deserves respect. Now, as we're exiting turn 2, now you can see the track out cone up in front here. There's the track out cone, you know, for turn 2. We're headed up this short chute, and we have a nice target up front. The men's restroom building is bright red, and it's much more visible in person than it is in this photo. So easy to aim at that as we exit turn 2. As we approach turn 3, called the left-hander, we want to be about a car width from the right side. Your instructor will work with you on this, but you'll see that there's a cone out there. A little hard to see, but there is a cone just above my white arrow that goes left that is telling us where to begin the turn in. But you know, many drivers find it not necessarily go all the way track right here. Regardless, turn 3 is important only in that we execute it properly to set up the following corner. And so, unlike what you would expect, we want to exit this corner on the left. We want to exit the corner here. And if this were a normal corner, we'd be exiting on the right, but we're not. And the reason is, notice this right-hand corner that comes up immediately that feeds onto the back straight. And so, you know, it's really important that we be along the left side of the track. And in particular, we want the car straight, right along in here, so that we're set up for that corner. Now, it's very easy to overdrive turn 3 and to be early or too fast. It is a bit awkward. It's challenging for many students, but once you get it right, it feels really good. So here's that target area, this little straight white line along track left. We want to focus on that, put the car right along that line. And as we approach the turn-in cone that you see here, this is the turn-in cone. As we approach that, we want to lift, no brakes. We're just going to lift and turn the car into the apex. And then as the car begins to head toward the apex, and we're confident that we've nailed the apex, now we can begin to apply gas. Of course, our eyes want to be well down track. There's a flag station, doesn't really show up because it's against the trees here, but there's a flag station down in here. It's a great place to be looking because that's where we're going to end up. And of course, if there's anything going on in front of us, we'll see that too. But that's a great visual reference at this point. The apex at turn 2 has some favorable banking, so we want to get down in nice and tight to that. And again, we're looking way down track past the flag station at this point. The next, one more thing here. As we feed on the gas and exit this corner, the camber changes. As I mentioned, the banking is favorable here at the apex, and it's favorable for a short distance after the apex, but then it goes off camber the other way. In other words, unfavorable. And so if we're on the ragged edge, we're going to lose a fair amount of grip at that point. So it pays paying careful attention. Again, your instructor is going to work with you on that. But that's one of the track surface characteristics here at Lime Rock, here and a couple other corners that we really have to pay attention to. Now, the next 3 corners are all fast corners, and they have similar braking techniques, which we're going to talk about. That said, they're all different, of course, but what they have in common is that they are quick corners, and we don't want to upset the car. Remember, we talked earlier about smoothness. Well, these are all 3 corners, great examples of where we want the car to be smooth. We want to be smooth with the controls so that the car is not upset. So the braking technique on these corners is to brake earlier than you might think and not as hard as you might think, not because we don't need to slow down. We do need to slow down, but we're going to do it in a way that doesn't upset the car as much. If we got right up close to the corner, slammed on the brakes hard, and then got back on the gas, guess what? Car is going to be upset and it's not going to be able to flow into the corner. So instead, we're going to brake, perhaps 2 or 3 times earlier, or 2 or 3 times the distance at a half or a third of the amount we otherwise would, to slow down the same amount, but without upsetting the car. So on a lower powered car, this is not much more than a brush of the brakes. On a high-powered car, it's obviously more than that. But it's the same technique regardless of the car. So, and also we don't want to do a lot of trail braking here. So right after we turn in, we're going to come off the brakes and get back on a little bit of gas, not necessarily a lot. But again, we want the car smooth, we want the car balanced. And if we get on a little bit of gas as we come off the brakes, the car will be balanced on all 4 tires. So, off the brakes. Now, this is the uphill, and this is actually sort of like 2 corners in some ways, because we turned the car and headed toward the apex that you see here. But as we get into the hill, we now have a lot more grip on the front of the car. We can turn the wheel a little more and get the car straightened out to go across the top of the hill. So we want to do that. We want to do a second, gentle turn of the wheel. Just turn the wheel gently and use that banking to our that hill to our advantage. It's really critical to go straight over the hill. As a beginning driver, you'll probably not want to be all the way track left here, because there isn't any margin really at track left here. But regardless of how we go over the hill, we want the car to be straight. If you have a powerful car, you cannot have your foot on the floor going over this hill, or the car will, traction control will kick in or worse. So be aware that there's a reason why there's a chicane off to the right that the race cars use, because they get airborne here. And hopefully that won't happen to you, but this hill does deserve respect. Now we're approaching West Bend. This is a classic right-hand 90-degree corner. It's a fun corner. No banking to it, pretty much flat in the sense of, no banking or camber one way or the other. But a common mistake here is to cheat and to not use the whole track. So stay all the way track left and wait till the turn-in point. A lot of people will also try to turn in a little bit early here, but again, doesn't pay to do that. Same braking technique, gentle braking, longer braking, and setting up the corner so that we can come off the brakes onto some gas not long after we turn in. We want to be looking through the apex to track out, like at any corner. We have pretty good sight lines here to toward the apex and toward track out. The apex here, like many corners, is actually a zone. We want to run along this curb for 10, 15, even 20 feet. And it's actually marked in this photo by two cones, which they demarcate the road, the access road that goes across the track here. But that's actually the apex, that whole road, where the curb is, where that road is, that's the apex here. And we just want to run right along that as we're in the middle of the corner here. As we exit, now we're aimed under the bridge, and we want to be track left, exiting West Bend. Obviously, we're just going to stay track left. In fact, we're going to follow that white line that you see here on the left. We're just going to follow that line all the way down the hill, because as we come down the hill, you'll notice that that white line actually, kind of comes back a little bit. Well, if we follow that white line, we've used every inch of the track surface to make the downhill corner that we're looking at now a touch easier. Now, the turn-in point for this corner is easy to see. It's also easy to feel. Yes, you see a cone sitting here, but notice the white line has the extra pavement on the outside of the white line has disappeared at that point. So that's a good visual reference. That's also the point where, as you come down the hill, your front tires are going to hit the flat of the front straight, as opposed to the hill that we're approaching it on. And so as soon as you feel the front tires hit the flat, it's time to turn. And this is a fast, not real sharp corner. So this is a corner where we're not going to jerk the wheel. We're going to wind the steering in because we're going pretty quick. It's not a sharp corner. We don't want to upset the car. Again, as we want to be coming off the brakes as we're turning in and beginning to feed in a little bit of gas just to balance the car until we get to the apex, in which point we can accelerate harder. And of course, it's very critical here to get the eyes way down track, because this is fast. There's, we're going to cover a lot of real estate in a hurry. We need to be looking ahead. The apex, again, we can run along the curb here for some 10 feet or so. And again, favorable banking on the apex side of the track here. Unfavorable banking as we get further out, just like on No Name Straight in the back. The road is crowned, meaning it's higher in the center than it is on either side. So as we're on the right side of the track here, we have favorable banking as we accelerate and start to get toward track out. All of a sudden, that favorable camber goes away. So that's a quick tour of Lime Rock. Here's a couple of reminders. Feel free to trail brake, meaning just carry the brakes into Big Bend. Same thing into the left-hander. But let's not do that for the other corners. These are fast corners. Like I said, we want to be smooth, have the car nice and balanced. So the uphill, West Bend, downhill. I talked about the adverse camber on no name straight and on the front straight as we exit the corners coming on. And as you get more experience, find some reference points that don't move, like that white line that I mentioned for the downhill. Your instructor will work with you on all of that, but these are some of the basics for Lime Rock. I hope you found them helpful. Again, we will talk about any questions you have about the track or driving in general in the classroom sessions at Lime Rock, but there'll be a discussion. There'll be a Q&A kind of discussion. So bring your questions, and of course you're free to send me any questions or comments ahead of time via email, and we'll do our best to address those as well. Again, I'm looking forward to seeing you at Lime Rock. I hope you have a safe trip to the track, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you there and to a great event. See you there.